Last week, we went through and listed who is on the hot seat in the Big Ten and really kind of went through the Big Ten hot seat meter, who was freezing cold, who was neutral, who's on a warm seat, and whose seats are on fire. And I thought it was a fun little exercise. So we're going to do the same again today, but with the SEC, who could potentially find themselves out of a job in 2024 and who's completely locked in, doesn't have anything to worry about. So we'll start with the freezing sector of the hot seat meter. And there are some unsurprising names on here. I think Mike Elko is the only first-year head coach in the SEC that is on the freezing cold meter, on the hot seat meter. I think Mike Elko is the exact opposite of Jimbo Fisher. And I think when you get in that situation where you just want somebody gone and you don't care, and you want pretty much the exact opposite of what they were, I think Mike Elko in a lot of situations is the exact opposite of Jimbo Fisher, and that's going to buy him a little extra time at A&M. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss has taken the Rebs to new heights. Self-explanatory. Steve Sarkisian, just coming off a college football playoff appearance. They've got maybe the Heisman Trophy front runner in Quinn Ewers. Are probably nobody's a lock, but Texas is as strong as a candidate for anybody to return to the college football playoff in 2024. And then Kirby Smart at Georgia. You win 2 titles back to back, and the only loss you have last year is to Alabama in the SEC championship game. And you could probably argue that Georgia still deserved to be in a 14 college football playoff. I wouldn't make that argument, but you could make that argument. I'd listen to it. Kirby Smart's got Georgia humming like anybody. That is the best program in America. His seat is freezing cold. But just up from freezing is the cold. I think Josh Heupel at Tennessee, seat is cold. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, same situation. Missouri coming off a New Year's Six Bowl win over Ohio State. That's looks very good on the resume. Mark Stoops at Kentucky could have left for Texas A&M, didn't. That's going to get you some points. And then Brian Kelly at LSU. You just won the Heisman Trophy with Jaden Daniels. I flat out picked LSU to win the national championship last year. Didn't. So that would put Brian Kelly neutral on my board. But I think for LSU fans, that honeymoon is still there because, you know, he brought his family down to Baton Rouge. Brian Kelly's done nothing to deserve anything other than having a cold seat. Now, in the neutral category are folks that can go either way, right? In 2024, at the end of the season, you can find yourself 100% squarely on the warm seat, depending on your results. And there are a couple of coaches that I think have to be somewhat worried about that. And then there are those that, depending on what they do this coming season, can plant themselves on the cold or even in the freezing category, in the neutral category. But I think there are 2 interesting names in the neutral category. The first one is Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. And almost solely because the expectations and the pressure are so high at Alabama that if you don't immediately meet them, the question is going to be, oh, God, did we screw this up? Did we hire the wrong person to replace Nick Saban? And I think those are going to be fair questions if they are asked. At the same time, I don't know that you can hold it against Kalen DeBoer, that you can pretend to believe Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, that Kalen DeBoer was the first choice, the only choice to replace Nick Saban as the head coach at Alabama. Or we can live in the real world and recognize that Mike Norvell got paid a huge fat stack of cash as part of a contract extension before Kalen DeBoer got hired as Alabama's head coach. Or that Dan Lanning had to publicly say he was not interested in the job before Alabama hired Kalen DeBoer. It certainly appears as if Kalen DeBoer, due to no fault of his own, was not Alabama's top choice. And I think it's important for people to remember that. Now, I realize that this is college football, and no fan is going to be like, hey, whoa, slow down just a second. He wasn't our first choice. It doesn't work that way. But I think it's important to know that kind of helps put you in the neutral category rather than the freezing cold category. That if you weren't the slam dunk 100% first choice, that inches you up from freezing to cold in my book. And then when you put together the fact that you are replacing the best guy to ever do this, the expectations are already somewhat unreasonable there. And if you don't equal them, it's a tough spot to be in. So Kalen DeBoer is in my neutral as a first-year head coach. It's a tough spot to be in. Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State is in the same category, almost strictly because when you're coming off a situation where a guy got fired early into his tenure as the head coach at Mississippi State, I think that it's somewhat similar to you want the opposite of what you just had, right? It's the same thing with Jimbo Fisher and Mike Elko at Texas A&M. Zach Arnett got fired after 10 games. Technically 11 if you count the bowl game. Zach Arnett got fired after 10 games as the head coach at Mississippi State. I don't know how you put Jeff Lebby anywhere other than the neutral category. Maybe he gets a little extra leash because they fired the last guy after 10 games, so they don't want to make that same move, right? You don't want to be the school that's firing guys after one season. But if they're willing to fire somebody who was on staff with Mike Leach and got elevated, and Mississippi State fans can jump in and talk about how there are so many different extenuating circumstances, doesn't matter. You fired a guy after 10 games. You have to then put his replacement in the neutral category because they're willing to fire somebody that was already there after 10 games. What are they willing to do to you who just got there? So, Jeff Lebby and Kalen DeBoer in the neutral category. I have Hugh Freeze from Auburn there as well, Brent Venables from Oklahoma, and Clark Lee from Vanderbilt there too. Hugh Freeze and Brent Venables, 2024, big season. The expectations at Auburn have been kind of low. They have not been super sky high yet for Hugh Freeze. If he has a disastrous 2024, I don't think he loses his job. I don't think. Because the honeymoon is still going on at Auburn. And they don't have a tough non-conference schedule, okay? Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, Louisiana, Monroe. They also play Vanderbilt and Arkansas. That should get them 6 wins. If Auburn does not make a bowl game in 2024, I think Hugh Freeze enters 2025 on the on fire category, but that's next year. If Auburn can finish anywhere between 7-5 to 9-3, 9-3 is probably pushing it. You got Oklahoma, Georgia. Their non-conference road games their conference road games are at Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky, at Alabama. Ouch. That's tough. So you're probably best case scenario 8-4. Then go 8-4. Then Hugh Freeze, I think, probably goes into next year on the cold category. They go anything less than 6-6. It's probably warm. If it's worse than 5-7, he is the on fire candidate. I think somewhat similar for Brent Venables. They had a nice bounce back. They played had a pretty good 2023. But you're entering a new conference in 2024 where, again, non-conference is a little more challenging than you might expect, where they're playing Temple, not great, Houston, Tulane, and then Maine, the Maine Black Bears. Whew, look out. So you should be 4-0 in non-conference. 3-1 worst case scenario if Tulane beats you. Their conference slate: Tennessee, Auburn, at Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, at Ole Miss, at Mizzou, Alabama, at LSU. That's not great. It's not fantastic. They didn't get an easy SEC schedule in their first year by any stretch of the imagination. So if they slip from 10-3 last year to 7-5, I think Brent Venables keeps his job, but I think he's on the warm or on fire category if we do this next year. And then Vanderbilt, the expectations are just simply so low, whether that's fair or unfair. It's just nobody expects anything out of Vanderbilt. And if you can get to a bowl game, it's like, oh, wow, this is really impressive. Now, somewhat similar to damn near everybody else in this conversation, their non-conference schedule is not super difficult. Virginia Tech, Alcorn State, at Georgia State, and Ball State should be 4-0. But then in the SEC, they don't get a whole lot of favors. At Missouri, Alabama, at Kentucky, Texas, at Auburn, South Carolina, at LSU, Tennessee. I think they can beat South Carolina. So that's 5. 5 wins. Not great. But when the expectations are so unbelievably low, 5 wins at Vanderbilt is 8 wins at a lot of schools. I think Karkley's probably pretty safe unless they have a disastrous 2-10 season or something like that. Now, in the warm category, I just have one coach, and I think it might be giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because while it appears as if he is really liked by the fan base, and the fan base seems to be pretty understanding, there haven't been a ton of results. And that's Shane Beamer, the South Carolina head coach. South Carolina has never really done a lot in the college football ranks. They're 5-7 last year. And the year before that, 8-5. 8-5, and you beat Clemson, you beat Tennessee, you beat Texas A&M. Feels all warm and fuzzy on the inside. But then they lost a bowl game to Notre Dame, and then last year lost to North Carolina in the opener, played Georgia pretty close, lost a bad Florida team, got pummeled by Mizzou, got beat by a Texas A&M squad that didn't have any expectations or interest in playing all that hard throughout the rest of the season. And then they lost to Clemson to end the season, 5-7. Shane Beamer needs a good 2024. And I don't know that he's going to get it because South Carolina's schedule, as it sits right now, they have 8 games. 8 games against preseason top 25 opponents. Now, obviously, that's not all going to stay the same, and some of those are going to fall out of the top 25. But I don't believe that I would tell you that I have any faith that South Carolina has any hope of jumping into the top 25 discussion anytime soon either. Non-conference schedule, Old Dominion, Akron, Wofford, and Clemson at the end of the season. So Old Dominion, Akron, Wofford, you would hope South Carolina goes 3-0 in that stretch. End the season with Clemson. It's kind of weird. South Carolina's last SEC conference game is 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, which is wild to me. But their conference schedule is tough. At Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, Texas A&M, at Vanderbilt, Missouri. How many of those games do you feel confident that they are winning? They got a pretty good game with Vanderbilt. You think they're going to be A&M? I don't. Mizzou? No. Oklahoma? No. Alabama? No. Ole Miss? No. LSU? No. Kentucky? Maybe. It's a tough schedule. And when you had a bad 2023 coupled with another, you are probably staring 5-7 back in the face. It's a bad time to have a bad year. If he can be 7-5, if South Carolina can get to a bowl game or a nice bowl game, I think it takes him maybe off the warm seat back to the neutral. but I don't think it's preemptive to put Shane Beamer on the warm seat right now. And that takes us to the hot seat, the on fire. And there are two guys, Billy Napier at Florida and Sam Pittman at Arkansas. And I'm on the record that Florida is in a hell of a spot to end the season. Because their non-conference schedule, they play Miami to open the year. Then they play Samford, UCF, and at Florida State to end the season. And for a while, that at Florida State to end the season wasn't a crippler. But right now in 2024, it is, because at Florida State to end the season, the games preceding that are versus Georgia, the number one team in America, in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. At Texas, who is a favorite to make the college football playoff. LSU, who's probably going to make the college football playoff. Ole Miss, who's probably going to make the college football playoff. And then at Florida State. They have potentially the most difficult 5-game stretch in college football history, where you have 4 teams, or potentially 5 teams, of the 12 who are going to make up the college football playoff are on your schedule 5 weeks in a row. And when the discussion has kind of already been about whether or not Billy Napier is the right guy for the job, there aren't many coaches in America who can weather that storm of losing 5 games in a row. So even if they go 1-4 in that stretch, and one of those 4, if you get one win, it's going to be an upset. It's going to be viewed as like, wow, Florida got Texas. Florida got LSU. I don't know that I feel really strongly that they have a real strong chance to win one of those last 5 games. But the 2 games before their bye week are at Tennessee and Kentucky, 2 teams that are ranked in the preseason top 25. It's a really, really difficult schedule for Florida at a really bad time in Billy Napier's tenure, because they were not world beaters by any stretch of the imagination in 2023 when you go 5-7. And your wins are against McNeese State, Tennessee, Charlotte, Vanderbilt, and South Carolina. And they lost 5 in a row to end the year last year, where you lost to Arkansas, who's not good in overtime. You got beat down by Georgia, beat down by LSU, lost to Mizzou in a tight one on the road, and lost to Florida State to help secure them an undefeated regular season. So you lose 5 in a row to end last year, to go 5-7. So with a 5-2 start, you end up 5-7, and you are staring a worse situation in the face in 2024, where you're not going to start 5-2, I don't think, in 2024 with a schedule of Miami, Samford, Texas A&M, at Mississippi State, UCF. I don't think they're going to start, and then at Tennessee, Kentucky. You're probably 4-3 is a great stretch there for the first 7 games of the season. The last 5 are really difficult. Difficult enough to lose you your job, I think. And then for Sam Pittman at Arkansas, they're just not progressing. They're not getting much better. And that's a tough spot to be in, because I think he's a fun, interesting dude. But you're coming off a 4-8 season where they lost 6 in a row at one point, and they held Mississippi State to 7 points at one point and lost. So their defense wasn't great. Offense was worse. Now their non-conference schedule is a little more difficult than darn near everybody else in the conference, where they'll play Arkansas Pine Bluff, FCS school, HBCU, in week number 1, at Oklahoma State, which is a tough time to draw a team that's going to be in the top 25 at a non-conference game, because you playing in the SEC, it's a difficult schedule to begin with. They also play UAB and Louisiana Tech, which isn't a world beater by any stretch of the imagination, in the non-conference. But their conference, at Auburn, Texas A&M, Tennessee, LSU, at Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas, at Missouri. Gah! I think it's another, you're staring potentially another 4-8 season in the face. You go back-to-back 4-8 years in the SEC. There's just not many dudes, especially outside of the, Auburn, LSU, or excuse me, Alabama, LSU, Georgia spots that can go 4-8 back-to-back years and hold on to your job. It just doesn't really happen that way. So don't be surprised to have Sam Pittman in Billy Napier. I think Billy Napier is just a problem, is a victim of the schedule, because I think Florida's kind of moving in the right direction. It's not going to show in the win-loss column, and that's a bad place to be. Like, it's sort of like when somebody's like, "Oh, I'm just a bad test taker." Oh, you struggle with what you struggle when we try to find out what you know. When it all boils down to is wins and losses are the only thing that matters, right? Doesn't matter whether you're getting better. Doesn't matter if you're building the right culture. Doesn't matter if you're getting better recruits. If you are not putting wins on the board, nobody cares. And that's a problem for Billy Napier when you're facing potentially the toughest 5-game stretch in college football history. I think his seat is on fire, and I don't know how he gets through that 5-game stretch still as the head coach of the University of Florida. I don't know how it happens. I don't want to see Billy Napier fired, because I thought when he got hired, I was like, that's a good hire. He's going to get Florida back to being a 10-win team every year. It hasn't happened yet, and it's not going to happen in 2024. And I don't know that he's going to get a chance to do it in 2025. So that'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. If you disagree, you think somebody's in the wrong category, let us know in the comments. Think we're stupid? That's fine. Let us know. We'll have that conversation in the comments. Just drop a comment, and we'll chat about it. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. You're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content that we are pumping out. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.